Hey everyone, my name is Ms. Granquist and I'm going to be in charge of tonight's review session. We still have a couple minutes before we get started, but I just wanted to get things going here. I do have the question page up on another screen, so if you post questions on the live review page, unfortunately group chat doesn't work, but you can post questions there and I'll try to answer them as we're going through. So far I only know of 2 questions that we have, so we'll be starting with these and going through those, and if we end up with more, we'll go through more, or once we're done with those questions and you guys are satisfied, we can be done. But we're going to give it a couple more minutes before we really get started. And this way you guys can, get whatever you need. And like I said, if you need to post questions while we're going through, I have that. And I also have some diagrams and things like that that I can show you on different models, since that was one of the questions that was up. All right, so we're going to take a couple minutes and then get started. For those of you who are just joining us, like I said, we'll be getting started in about a minute here, right when it hits 8 o'clock and our time. And I will be answering the questions from the forum. If you have more questions, please post them there. The chat feature doesn't work. So that's really the only way that I will see the questions. And I do have some diagrams, since one of the questions was about models, and that will hopefully work. You can let me know if you see it in the comments on the forum page, and we'll be doing that. But give us another few seconds for anyone else to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Which does mean that now's a great time to go get yourself a drink of water or a snack or whatever you need, so that we can power through this. Okay, this is just a test for me to see if you guys can see the demographic transition model here. I hope that you can. If you can't see it, please let me know if you can't see the demographic transition model right now, please let me know in the comments on the forum site, and we'll try to get that fixed. All right, but we're going to go back to me here, and I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, looks like we have 2 people watching us right now. If anyone else joins in, please just let us know, commenting on the forum site, so that we can get your questions answered too. My name is Ms. Granquist, and I'm going to be running tonight's session. We don't have a lot of questions right now on the forum page, so once we're done with those, if you guys don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and be done. Other than that, if you do have more, we'll keep going, and we'll just try to use everybody's time wisely. So let's start with the first question, which was, what are the most important theories and models that are tested? And I would say that we got a lot of models in this course. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to screen share with you basically some of what I would consider the most important models that you should really pay attention to. And the thing to remember with models is they're generalizations. A model is just a generalization about things, and it's just made on observation of various data that people have seen. And so therefore, models shouldn't be scary. They're really just a way of generalizing information that we know of in order to kind of be able to make predictions, understand what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. And when I go through the models, I'll go through them in the order of the standard order of the units. But if you have any questions on a specific model, please just let me know in the comments on the forum section, and we can take a little more time on any of them. That is no problem. We can take as much time as we need on any of the models to make sure you guys feel confident about them. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to bring up the models just so that we can see them. Come on, where's my little control bar here? There we go. All right, so come on. Okay, so this is where if you cannot see what I'm showing you, you should let me know in the comment section on the forum so that we make sure we all can see it. So I would say this is probably one of our biggest models that we really need to pay attention to, the demographic transition model. And of course, this model is about population, and in terms of what we do with this and what we understand about this particular thing, we need to understand what this model is good for. And this model was created, of course, on the experiences of industrialized countries, European countries, that were, and what they went through in population and what that might mean for what they're going to go through in population. And so our big stages here, the first stage, of course, we have fairly small populations, fairly high birth rates, but also fairly high death rates. And that big thing in the middle, this is what is our most important thing here, this population boom that happens when the death rate falls, and it takes a while for the birth rate to catch up. And of course, the reason the death rate falls is has to do with basically improvements in sanitation, improvements in food, and those kinds of things. And then after a while, people start having fewer children because they realize that most of their children are going to survive. Also, people are moving into urban areas, and one of the factors we know of with urban areas is that people living in urban areas tend to have fewer children than people living in rural areas. However, our population is going to go through this big growth here. Something to keep in mind, Malthus is writing right about here. When he writes his Malthusian theory, this is why he's so freaked out about population, is because this is what he sees happening, is the beginning of this population explosion because of the fall of the death rate, and the people are still having lots and lots of kids. So that's just something to keep in mind. Here is Malthus. So we know that countries, our industrialized countries, get down to this stage, and we again have kind of a stabilization of population, but we now have low birth rates and low death rates. And of course, some people then predict a stage 5 where death rates will be higher than birth rates, and will actually go into population decline. In terms of what you need to know about this, I would say you need to understand this section here, what caused it, what stage different countries might be in, like countries that have high population growth right now, where they are. One of the things that you need to think about in that, of course, is population pyramids, and be able to understand the population structures, and then be able to put these population structures in the appropriate place on the demographic transition model. All right, so if you are thinking about a stage 2 country, it's going to look a lot like this. Stage 2 and 3 are going to look more like this. Stage 4, End of stage 3, beginning of stage 4 looks like this. Stage 4, maybe beginning stage 5 looks like this. That's the kind of thing that you need to just kind of have in your brain. Okay, the next big population theory, just gravity model. And for this one, you just need to understand the concept. You do not need to be able to do this math. Don't worry about the math. They're not asking you to do math really on the exam, but you do need to understand the concept that you're going to have larger interactions between bigger places than you are between smaller places over long distances, that the bigger places have more gravity, and that's going to affect everything from economics to immigration. And so just keep that thing in mind. Then, of course, we have our diffusion models when we look at the movements of things over time. So we're looking at, first of all, we're looking at expansion diffusion, which is either contagious or hierarchical, and then we have relocation diffusion. And so you need to just understand how these processes work. So just real quick, if we, contagious diffusion, we're expanding, and this is why it's expansion diffusion. It expands the number of people who are practicing a particular cultural idea through personal contact. All right. Whereas hierarchical diffusion is also expansion diffusion, but it's going to happen in a slightly different way. All right. So we go from big place to big place to slightly smaller places, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is like, the fashion in Paris does not immediately show up in the suburbs of any city. It goes from Paris to New York, and it doesn't even go to the New York suburbs yet. It's going to take a while to spread out to those smaller locations. Relocation diffusion differs from expansion diffusion in that you aren't expanding the number of people practicing a particular trait. They're just taking it with them. All right, so relocation diffusion is just going to take this group and split it, and we're going to have people live over here too. All right, so that's just the big thing with there. Then Ratzel's organic state model. With this one, I would say you don't really need to memorize the 7 laws probably. What you need to, again, and this is with all the models, understand the concept behind it. So the idea that the state is an organism and is going to grow and is going to change like an organism does. So it grows with population growth. The territorial growth follows like, it's going to expand in other ways before it moves on to territorial growth. And let's see. Okay. And so that's just one of the things. So we have, glad to know that you guys are seeing it. I just checked all your comments, and I'm glad everyone's seeing everything. So basically with this, it's just understanding what happens. And a good example for this is, looking at imperialism and colonialism and how the various colonial powers looked at, they said, oh, we have all this, all these goods that we want to sell to people, and we need more resources to make more goods that we can sell to more people. And they figured out, okay, well, we're just going to find new people to do this with and find new places to take resources. And so that's a good place to use it. Von Thünen. Von Thünen's important. Of course, he's our big agriculture model. He's been in a number of essay topics, a number of multiple choice questions. So I would say you need to be pretty comfortable with Von Thünen. A couple years ago, I don't think it was last year, I think it was 2 years ago, where they compared Von Thünen and the Burgess model. So I bring that up mainly just to know that you can be dealing, especially in your FRQs, you can be dealing with things that cross the themes. All right. So comparing Von Thünen and Burgess, of course, they look the same, but then you have to think a little bit more and, of course, talk about bid rent. All right. And so that's our big thing here with Von Thünen and with our urban models is the concept of bid rent. So I'm actually going to go a little ahead here and find my bid rent model so that we can look at that real quick. No, that's not it. Sorry, we'll come back to that one. Here's my bid rent model. Nope. Yes, here we go. Bid rent. You don't have to be able to draw this. This is just looking at the fact that in the interior of the urban area, land is going to cost more. Therefore, you have to do things that earn more money in your interior area, whereas out here, land costs less, and therefore you can do things that take up a lot more land. So Von Thünen, this applies to Von Thünen in that our goods that we are growing here in the central area, A, they don't take a lot of room and land is expensive. B, they earn a lot more money per acre of what you're doing. So this is where you're doing your fruits, your vegetables, things like that, that you actually get a lot of money for. Of course, also with Von Thünen, we have the idea, you know, as with all of our urban models and everything, they're all on that blank plane, the isotropic plane. And so that's a thing here, because what they're saying is with Von Thünen, all of this land is equally good. So the only thing that is really affecting stuff is distance from that central point, from that market. And so this is the standard Von Thünen. You'll see some other ones that don't have the forest area because we don't tend to have a lot of forest right around our cities these days. But the same concept is there, where you have your market gardening here, then you have all your things that take extensive use of land versus intensive use of land. Extensive means it takes a lot of land. And so we have our field crops and grains, and then out here, of course, we have our ranching and livestock. We need to think about transportation in terms of Von Thünen, because the amount that it costs to bring something into the city also factors into the distance. So grains and things like that, they don't cost a lot. You throw them in a wagon and bring them in, all right? Our cattle and stuff, they can walk in by themselves. That's pretty cheap. But think about like carting tomatoes around. You throw a bunch of tomatoes in a wagon, you're gonna end up with, you know, squished tomatoes by the time you get into the market, and no one's gonna wanna buy them. So that's also one of the factors in terms of determining where we grow things, the transportation factor, the bid rent factor, etc. Of course, Von Thünen can be modified if you have a river or a road or something like that that goes through it. And so you may see a variation on Von Thünen when you apply it to the real world. And of course, today we have a global agricultural system, not just an isolated state like in Von Thünen. And so that is also going to have a huge impact. But you can still see that there are regions of the world where, due to transportation and the cost of land, certain things are going to be grown versus other areas. Okay, check messages, see what we're doing here. Okay, so we'll go back to, I saw the question on diffusion for peoples and ideas, etc. We'll go back and we'll spend a little more time on the diffusions. Malthus and the Neo-Malthusians, completing a practice FRQ. Let's see. Okay, we'll cut back to Malthus, etc. And I will help you with the other diffusion question. Do we want to we'll go ahead and we'll hit diffusion since we've already covered that in our models. I'm going to go back to our diffusion section here so we can talk about that a little bit more in depth. All right, so we have our contagious diffusion here. And contagious diffusion, this is where things have to spread by personal contact. And I like to think of this like a cold. You have to sneeze on somebody to give them your cold, all right? You can't send it to them in a letter. You can't, you know, talk to them on the phone. You have to have that personal contact. Sometimes religions need this kind of contagious diffusion to pass. Sometimes if you think about food, you're going to have a lot more of a particular kind of food in an area close to where that food originated. So we have a lot more the various types of Mexican cuisine, Tex-Mex, Cali-Mex, whatever you want to call it, in the areas closer to Mexico. That's not saying there aren't Mexican restaurants elsewhere in the United States, but there's a lot fewer of them because the food has not been adopted quite as much as it has in areas closer to the point of origin. So that's our contagious diffusion. So we can look, see, and it just moves, and this is a type of expansion diffusion. When we get to our next type of expansion diffusion, that's our hierarchical diffusion. And the question here from the forum notes, go over the question. The spread of specialty coffee shops across the United States in the 1990s is an example of A, hierarchical diffusion, B, contagious diffusion, C, stimulus diffusion, D, periodic movement, and A, relocation diffusion. The answer is hierarchical diffusion, because let's think about where coffee shops started. They started in big cities. Why? Because you need a lot of people to go to them in order to make money. So they spread from big city to big city. All right, our Starbucks started here in Seattle. It did not immediately go to, I'm blanking on small towns, so small town city somewhere. All right, it went from here to New York, and from New York to LA, and from LA to Houston, and from Houston, and basically out to large cities where they had a large population to pull from, and where people are really tied into popular culture. And remember, with popular culture, people want the new thing. They want to change rapidly. They want to try the trendy thing, and the coffee shops were really kind of the trendy thing. And so it moved hierarchically across the country. Now, of course, Starbucks is everywhere. It's gone through, you know, the various stages of hierarchical diffusion to really reach saturation within the United States. Our other part, relocation diffusion, this is, we're really talking about usually ethnic cultures, non-universalizing religions, things like that, and they're going to move that way. So our universalizing religions want to convert people. All right, they want people to join their religion, whereas our ethnic religions tend to not seek converts the same way. So when we see an ethnic religion move, it's going to move in terms of the people themselves are moving. They actually pick up their stuff and take their cultural ideas with them and go over there, as opposed to converting any of these people to their cultural ideas. So that's our relocation diffusion. All right, so I think I hit those. We'll go back over Malthus a little bit later, and we're going to finish going through the models here. Let me check and see where we are. We'll go back over demographic transition again at the end. We did that at the beginning of this broadcast, but I think you just joined us. So Savannah will hit that again a little bit later. All right, so let's go through and finish up. We did our von Thünen model. Now we need our industrial model. So we're going to hit 3 of them. Of these, I would say Weber's and Christallers are the 2 most important. Hotellings, it's nice, but I don't think you'll see a lot of questions on hotellings, but we'll go over it just really quick. That's the, it's usually standard is the ice cream model, where you have one, and this is in terms of looking at market share. So you have one vendor on the beach, and he is going to be smack dab in the middle so that everybody can get to them. However, if you have 2 vendors move into the beach, where are they going to go? Well, actually, they're both going to be right in the middle, because they want to, each of them, this guy isn't going to want to be over here, because then he's giving up a lot of market share to this guy. And so they're going to be here so that they can equally compete for all of the market share. And this changes when you get 3, then you'll start to see them spread out. But generally speaking, it's just an explanation of where shops are going to locate in order to try to gain the most market share possible. And then, like I said, that's okay, but I don't think that's one of the most important ones. I think that Weber, his model is a lot more important than hotellings. And this is looking, again, we're still on our isotropic plane, so everything's the same everywhere. And what we're going to look at here is where do we locate our businesses and our industries in relation to our marketplaces. And Weber basically says that there's a few things that we're going to take into account. The first thing that we're going to take into account is whether our industry is bulk gaining or bulk losing. And what that's going to deal with then is if this is where our resource is, this is where, whatever it is that we're making, and say in this example, we're making stuff out of wood. And this is where our market is. So where do we want to locate our factory in relation to the resource and the market? So if it's going to gain bulk and become harder to transport, we want to locate our factory close to the market. If we are making furniture or pianos, we want to be right here, because transporting pianos and transporting furniture costs a whole lot more than transporting big logs. If something is bulk losing, like paper or firewood, it's pretty easy to transport paper and firewood. They're pretty easy to stack up. They don't break, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can locate those close to the resource because it's going to be cheaper for you to transport things across this long distance than it will be to transport the big log here. So in this case, transporting paper is cheaper than transporting big logs, but transporting pianos is a lot harder. And so that's this. Sometimes we modify Weber and we talk about labor as well and where your labor is located. And so that would simply add another point to our triangle. And then we would have to kind of decide, again, based on transportation of these things, where are we locating our industry? Christaller. Christaller is really important. Central place theory affects a whole lot of things. And basically what we're looking at here is how far people are willing to travel to get something and how big of a pull, and we can go back to our gravity model here, how much gravity does a particular thing have? So let's think about a grocery store. How many grocery stores are in your hometown? There's probably a fair number of them. And you probably have one that's closer to you. You may pass that one and go to another one, but it's pretty unlikely. The same thing with gas stations, all right? Have you ever, driven by and seen a gas station on every single corner of an intersection? That's because people aren't normally willing to really go very far out of their way to get a gas station. They want one that's very convenient. So it does not have a big pull to get people to go to it. Something like an amusement park would have a lot greater pull. All right, so we get into threshold and range. All right, so the threshold, so our, this is our business, whatever it is, and this threshold is basically the number of people it needs to survive. Okay, so something big like an amusement park needs a huge number of people, a huge number of customers to go to it for it to be economically viable. Something like a gas station may not need as many because its cost outlay is a lot smaller. So it can survive with a smaller number of customers than the amusement park can. All right, the range, this is the distance that people are willing to travel to get to it. So if their threshold is out here, but the range is in here, that is a business that is not going to survive. They need too many people and people just aren't going to be willing to travel to it. All right, so you definitely want your threshold to be less than the amount of distance that people are willing to go to your particular area. And Christaller took this and basically talked about this in terms of central places. So central places are those places that have greater pull, they have more amenities, people are willing to travel farther to get to them. And then you have smaller, in the hierarchy, you have smaller places which have fewer amenities and people aren't willing to travel quite so far. And then the smallest places have even less amenities. All right, and when he designed this out, he did it in, do I have a picture? Yes, hexagons. And the reason he used hexagons was because if he had circles in his diagram, it would overlap and that would look unpleasant. And so the hexagons basically indicate this, we have our central place here, the red is our biggest place, and then we're looking at the amount of space that it can pull from, all right, that people are willing to travel to that place for the amenities. These two things just point out that other factors affect this because, of course, the world is not an isotropic plane. And since the world is not an isotropic plane, you have things like transportation, you have state borders and things like that. And so those can also affect the placement of our central places. And here we have our larger towns ended up being located on the transportation lines. Here it was done as a railroad. And then the smaller towns are located off. Or like in Nevada and Utah, gambling's not legal in Utah, gambling is legal in Nevada. So instead of being equidistant between these two, this large town ends up being a little closer to this one because the border makes this a more attractive place for this particular town to be. So that's central place theory. Then we get into our urban models. Oh, that's bid rent again. Okay, so of course Burgess is our first of the urban models, and he's the concentric zone model. Remember I said they did the essay recently where they compared Burgess and von Thünen, and the big thing you had to think about was, of course, the way they look. And then, right, and so this is all about bid rents. Central business district, not a whole lot of people live in a central business district because the land cost is too high. And so what you generally have there are businesses or very high-end retail that is going to be able to afford the price per square foot. Residences don't just generally earn enough money to support that price per square foot. So then you go outward from there, and basically you have the innermost zone for Burgess. And remember, Burgess is based on Chicago. The innermost zone of Burgess was the poorest housing, and then you have the working class zone, which is slightly better. And then as you get outward, you get nicer stuff because these people can travel farther in. They have the money to travel. All right, our next one is the sector model, which was basically just adapting Burgess's model. And what they did was they said, hey, you know, again, the world's not an isotropic plane. We have these transportation lines. And so they did the same idea, but they based it along transportation lines, public transportation or individual transportation. I think most, like the factories and industry are in a zone and they go out along a transportation line. High-class residential, kind of very much like our Latin American model with a very, you know, kind of a spine into the city. Low-class residential, very close to the workplace. All right, so they are in these locations because they need to be close to work. And the middle class over here because they can afford to travel. The next one is a different one, the multiple nuclei model. And this is looking at developments in new cities where we're really seeing that you don't just have one central business district and everything happens there. And it's looking at, instead you have these nodes. So if you have been to a city or you live in a city and you hear talks about like the museum district or the medical district or something like that, that's basically all the multiple nuclei model is dealing with. It's dealing with the fact that you have these separate nodes where individual things can happen. And so instead everything is kind of centered around various nodes, and it's in, that's the nuclei, and it's in not necessarily in kind of a ring pattern or based on specific transportation lines. And then our newest model for North America is the urban realms. And this is basically dealing with all of our conurbations and how our cities are growing together. And as our cities grow together, we end up with multiple cities that have multiple central business districts, all kind of running into one big, large metropolitan area. And we hear this, you know, Bosnia-Wash and the whole LA area, Dallas DFW, all of that kind of stuff. And so we're talking about there is where these Minneapolis, St. Paul, you have cities that have kind of grown together. And so instead of being a model that can just address one urban area, it has to address multiple cities and all of their central business districts. Then we have our developing world model. And basically what we see here is the opposite of the American model. And in the American model, we tend to have our richer people living on the outskirts of the city, and in the developing world and in the Latin American model, instead the periphery is the slums. This is where the poorest people live because these are all, remember that largest migration stream in the world is rural to urban, and so they're all moving in, but they don't have the money to move in here, so they kind of build shanty towns and stuff in the outside. All right. So that's kind of all of our models. If you want me to spend more time on any of them, I can certainly do that, but I'm going to go back really quickly to the demographic transition model since someone had a question on that. Here's our demographic transition model. We have stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The basic concept of this, of course, is that it is looking at the experiences of the experiences of European and other industrialized countries, countries that are already industrialized today, and looking at them and seeing, you know, can we describe what happened to them? Because most of this is just descriptive, describing what happened to those. And then can we make any predictions from there on out? And What's most important, of course, is at stage 2, where the death rates begin to fall, and we have a huge population boom, because it takes a while for the birth rates to fall and meet the death rates. And as I said earlier, this right here is where Malthus is writing, which is where why he is so freaked out about the whole thing with population growth. So we have a huge, from stage 2 to stage 3, we have a huge growth in population. This is that J curve, the exponential growth, et cetera, et cetera. And then when we hit stage 4, we do start to see things level off. Now, you could ask, why doesn't it immediately level off right here? Why don't we see it, you know, go back to this? Why does it keep growing? That's population momentum, is what is keeping things moving through here, is the fact that we have so many people having so many more kids, or even not having so many more kids, but just so many people who are having kids. That is going to make population continue to grow until it starts to level off, and then possibly in stage 5 will begin to decline. The big thing here, sanitation and food, is what's going to really cause this to happen. And here we're really seeing people move into cities, and that's going to really cause populations to decline, or birth rates to decline, because in cities, when you live on a farm, and you have more children, those children are an economic boon. They help you in your work. They help you build things, whatever, all of those kinds of things. And in the city, kids become more of an economic cost than economic gain. And so it is a fairly natural thing in urban areas for birth rates to decline, because it costs more money to have the kids. All right, so let's check our messages, see how we're doing. Let's see, okay. Let's go back to Malthus and Neo-Malthusians, because that question came up. There was a practice FRQ. Why has Malthus's prediction not occurred? What arguments do Neo-Malthusians make as a warning? So Malthus basically said that we were going to exceed our carrying capacity. All right, remember, carrying capacity for any particular area is the amount of population that an area can support due to, I'm going to turn off the presentation because I'm now gesturing at you and you can't see me. So carrying capacity is that amount of population that an area can support before you have famines and things like that. And so Malthus basically said that populations were growing to the point that we were going to exceed the carrying capacity, and therefore we were going to have massive wars, famine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's basically happened, and this is where you get into Boserup, all right? And Boserup, or Boserup, I don't actually know how to pronounce her name, but luckily there's no pronunciation portion of the human geography exam. So Boserup said, hey, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. As we come close to the carrying capacity and hitting that ceiling, we find new technological means of exceeding it and of going past that point. And so things like the Green Revolution, increases in agricultural production through industrial agriculture, all of those kinds of things where we've changed the way that we produce food technologically has prevented us from meeting that ceiling which Malthus predicted. Neo-Malthusians say we're still going to hit that ceiling, that we are going to get to the point where we are not going to be able to overcome the limitations we have through new technological factors, and that therefore we are still going to hit the ceiling and we are still going to have war, famine, death, etc., all the bad things, unless we bring our population down. But basically the answer to this, I would say, would be to talk about Boserup's theory and technology, is where I would go with that. Let's see, do we have any more questions that I haven't gone over? Oh, this one was from Miles, that was early on. Should we know the exact hearths of crops and livestock and how they were diffused? I would say in terms of hearths, you really need to know the big ones, the river valleys. You should know the river valleys, and then the other couples that were also independent innovation, but you don't necessarily need to know, oh, this is where potatoes came from and this is where wheat came from. But you do need to know, where did agriculture come from? All right, and that's big. And so we know agriculture, various types of agricultures, of course, developed in our river valley civilizations, our big four. So we have the Nile Valley, we have the Tigris Euphrates, we have the Indus Ganges, and we have the Huang He. And those are our big four and the earliest of our independent hearths. And then we have places like Meso and Andean America and West Africa, which also looked like they were independent innovations and places where agriculture also developed. And so I would say you need to know that kind of information more than memorizing where every single crop came from or something like that. You do need to know, you know, animal domestication had a big impact on this, and most animals were domesticated around our big four river valleys in Eurasia and also in Northern Africa. And that's where we see our biggest amounts of domestication in animals working with us, which of course improved technologically the amount of food that these people could produce. It also, of course, gave them diseases, which then had a big impact on the civilizations as well. But yeah, I would focus on that more than on trying to memorize every single crop and every single animal where they came from. You do need to know, I would say, there weren't very many domesticatable animals in the Americas. I mean, all they really had, I think, was the llama and the chinchilla, and dogs. Everybody had dogs. But beyond that, yeah, I think South America had the llama and the chinchilla was pretty much it, and the llama breeds. And I don't think until the Europeans brought horses, there were no large domesticatable animals in North America beyond that were really able to do anything. And I think, yeah, so that I would say would be important. Let's see if there's anything else here. I think we've gotten everything. So any other questions on things? If you have questions, stick them on the forum so I can answer them. Beyond that, I remember there were some questions from the first broadcast kind of on whether or not the test followed any specific textbook or something like that, or any specific review book, and it doesn't. And they work very hard to make sure that the test does not focus on any particular textbook. In some ways, that's really good for you because you don't have to have a specific textbook, but in other ways, that can get hard because not all textbooks use the same vocabulary. So what I would just make sure that I do if I were you is just make sure you know the terminology, and you know that, okay, what terminology am I using? And when you look at a topic and they ask you a question, you go, oh, I don't know that word, you know, take some time, read through the answers and go, hey, this sounds a lot like that term, which I do know, and use that as kind of your guideline. There was some controversy a number of years ago over the fact that there was one textbook which did not use the terms supranationalism and devolution. And there was an FRQ on supranationalism and devolution, which really threw those kids who didn't use that textbook for a loop. Or I'm sorry, who used the one textbook that didn't use those terms, and it threw them for a loop. And so that's something that, you know, just if you're using a review book or something like that, just go through and look at all the possible vocabularies and make sure you understand them. We have vocab lists on our site, so you might go through those, and if you see something you go, oh, hey, I've never heard of that term before, just spend a moment and look it up. And it's probably a term you know, but just a different word for that concept. And so I think that that's something that's, you know, would probably be one of my tips I'd give. Another thing I saw is, you know, what do you do if you run across an FRQ and you have no idea what to do with it? You don't even know what it's talking about. In that case, I would say, you know, answer the others first, because you want to make sure that you don't spend too much time on one that you're struggling with and then not have enough time to answer the ones that you knew well. Answer them first and don't leave it blank. All right. You will, you know, start writing, even if you're just writing, I don't know what I'm talking about, and then it may give you an idea of something to say. Just, you know, if you know anything about the topic, if it's on politics, just start writing about politics, because, hey, you might earn a point. Whereas if you leave it blank, you definitely can't. And so that, I guess that would be my other tip is, answer the ones you know first, and then go back, and if you just write something that has to do with the topic, and that will hopefully help. I'm not seeing any more questions come up. So we have about 20 minutes, and if you have more questions, I'd certainly like to answer them. But if we are all done, then we can certainly be done. So I'm going to give it a couple of moments before I, call it quits. Because I want to make sure we do stuff. Let me look back and see if there's any good questions on the last one. Oh, Mr. C, he did put a thing on the responses to the other questions on Wednesday, and where there's an infographic on FRQs that have been for other tests and things like that. So I would go there and check out the links that he gave you. I think that would be very helpful. Let's see. There are not any, I'm looking at the questions from last time. There aren't any good link websites for test released questions. It's just going to be practice. They just haven't released that many exams because we're a much younger exam than some of the others. I mean, U.S. history is a much older exam. They've released a lot of tests, so people have been able to create those resources. We've really only had, I think, 2 released tests, and so there's just not that kind of information out there. Someone asked, study strategy so you don't have to cram. Do a little at a time. All right, just kind of look at what you have in between now and the test, and just give yourself a schedule. Okay, so this week I'm studying population, and then next week I'm studying culture, and then and just so that you aren't sitting there the night before the exam going, whoa, what do I do? Let me see anything else. There was a question on explaining European colonialism and imperialism. Colonialism and imperialism are very similar but different things. And both of them are based on the idea of mercantilism. And mercantilism is the idea that you create colonies for the benefit of the mother country. All right. And so when we think about the creation of the American colonies, the Europeans create the American colonies, we can kind of use that as an example. They wanted the resources from these areas. They wanted to send their excess population to these areas. They wanted to sell products to these areas, all of that kind of thing. But the colonies were there to serve the mother country. Colonialism versus imperialism then. Colonialism is going to be sending people to live there. Sending, your excess population is going to go there and live. The problem is then often they want to have more independence than you want them to have. So the same thing that happened with the American colonies. Imperialism is slightly different. You do go to there and you do take the territory and the resources, but instead of sending your excess population there and actually kind of recreating your country there, you just kind of control the country militarily, and you take its resources that way. So that's kind of the difference between them. Colonialism, you're going to send people and kind of recreate your country. Imperialism, you're not. Okay, I see 2 more questions. One, international division of labor, outsourcing, etc., important for the test? Yes. It's important in a lot of ways. First of all, it's important because we do have a global division of labor. And we also have the same thing in agriculture. So you really want to think about that integration of the world economy. It's very hard for a country right now to stand outside of the world economy and not interact with it, because everything is interrelated. We get our coffee from over here. We sell our products over there. We get... why do we have fruits and vegetables in the winter? We have fruits and vegetables in the winter because we have this global sourcing of agriculture. All right. And so that means we don't have to, store onions and carrots in our houses all winter in hopes that we still have vegetables. But it's the same thing with labor. And so the big thing that you're going to see companies do now is when they try to control costs, they try to control costs in a number of ways. And one of the ways they try to control cost is labor. And so they look at it and say, okay, so if I set my factory up over here in this country where the labor is a whole lot cheaper, what is that going to do? I'm going to set my factory over here. Is the labor cheap enough there to counter the cost of transportation? And with the way transportation works today, the costs have gone down a lot. And so it is a lot easier to put your factories and things like that in other places. And all of this creates that economic interdependence. And so when we get into our structuralist versus liberal models in industrialism, I probably should have had them on my slide, but they don't really have visuals, so that's probably why I didn't put them there. The structuralist model, of course, says that we've structured the world economy in such a way that it is hard for developing countries to get to the same status as developed countries, and that we do this in we go to a country, an industrialized country, go to a non-industrialized country, and we take their resource. And we say, okay, we're going to buy your rubber from your rubber trees. Great, you grow rubber for us, we're buying it. And we take it back and we then make it into products and we sell it to our own people, and we also sell it back to those people. And the problem with that is it's always more expensive to buy the manufactured product than to buy the resource itself. And so they are always going to be at an economic disadvantage in comparison to the industrialized country that is buying from them and selling to them. They will never be able to match them economically. They will always be at a second tier. That's the structuralist model, and we really get into that in terms of the way the global economy is set up. In terms of outsourcing within the US, we certainly want to talk about that, like our footloose industries. And there was an essay quite a number of years ago, that was on footloose industries and call centers, and how call centers are very, they aren't tied to any particular place. They don't have a resource they are creating, that they are using or they are creating. So you can really put them anywhere that's cheap. And so we have a lot of footloose industries, especially with so much of the economy taking place on the web. We don't necessarily need to have software developers in the same country as the people who are their customers. They can be somewhere else because there's not a resource that they're using beyond mental resources. So it can be really anywhere. And so that becomes very important when you're then looking at the location of industries and also how that then ties all of these countries together. Another question was, what information should you have on hand about developing and developed countries? I would think just kind of go through your themes. All right, so developing countries versus developed countries, what do they look like population-wise? All right, and think about those kinds of things and how that's going to affect things. In culture, all right, there's not necessarily a lot you can do with that. You might want to talk about gender roles. That might be a place you could go in terms of developed versus developing, and how the education of girls or something plays into things in terms of a culture idea, but that's not going to go very far. But you get to politics, and you might have a lot of things that you can think about in terms of politics with developed versus developing. And you might think about stable countries, unstable countries. You might think about international alliances and those kinds of things. So go through that. Then you might want to go into agriculture. And so most of our developing countries are, of course, going to be countries that most of the population is still employed in extracting materials from the ground, whether that's agriculture or mining or whatever it is, but they're in extractive industries. Some of them are going to be in secondary industries and do some manufacturing, but mostly are going to be extractive. And remember, we just talked about where that puts them in terms of the global economic structures. They're always, if your economy is based on extraction, even if it's oil extraction, you're always going to be second tier to the places that buy and then sell back to you. And then, like we just talked about with the economy, urban areas, you want to kind of, again, think, okay, what does our developed world look like in terms of cities? What does our less developed world look like in terms of cities? And that's just the kind of thing I would go through and kind of, almost a T chart in your head that you can think about. All right. Let's look at some more questions. The European population axis. Elizabeth, I'm not actually sure what you're referring to there. Do you mean like where is their population centered? I'm not entirely sure about that one. So if you could give me a little bit more information so I can answer that more clearly. In terms of where their population is centered, their population is mainly urban, just like the US. But I don't know if that's really what you're asking. So give me a little more information so that I can get that to you. And if it takes you a few minutes, it's okay. I can even respond written if our time is up on the video. And someone says, hi, Mr. Adams. So hi, Mr. Adams. All right, let's see if there's anything else here that we need to go over. I'm not seeing a lot. This is a great time to ask questions. We'll be doing this every week, guys. So don't think that you are going to be, you know, at a loss if you don't get your question out today. Because Mr. C is going to be running a session every week, and I'm going to be running a session every week. And so we are happy to continue to answer your questions for the whole time. All you have to do is, we're not entirely sure we're going to keep this one at this time, so just pay attention. We may be moving it to a weekday a little later in the evening, like 9:30 or something. We're still working on that. Nothing is set in stone. So, but Mr. C's Wednesday at 8, he's set. That's going to be every Wednesday at 8, and I will be some other time during the week. And like I said, we'll keep on running these. So if you come up with questions, do not fear. We will be happy to answer them for you. If we run out of time within a video session, we will answer in writing to you on the comments board, because we want to make sure that we get all of those questions answered. Hopefully you're checking out the videos. I think our next unit goes live on Monday, so you'll get population if it's not already open to you. And so it'd be, you know, a good thing to do probably is to go through and ask your, go through and just kind of scan through the documents and the videos that we have. There is a document for every video that we come across, although it may be that 2 videos are condensed in 1 document or something like that. And we hope that we're covering all the information there that you need. Let's see, one more. Great. Yep, so we're having all these reviews, we're doing all this stuff. Yeah, I don't really have, I don't seem to have any more questions here. So I guess we'll go ahead and sign off for the night. Have a good evening. Don't study too hard. Remember, small pieces. That's going to be better than trying to cram it all into one night. And I will see you guys for the next session that I do. And take it easy. So good night.